Welcome to the podcast where relationships, confidence, and determination all converge into an amazing, heartfelt experience. This is Speaking from the Heart.
Welcome back to episode number 116 of Speaking from the Heart. Today we have Stephany Ann with us, and Stephany is an extraordinary woman, an attorney, recipient of the Governor's Award for Advocacy with Survivors of Domestic Violence, and international best-selling author who triumphed over narcissistic abuse. With 2 marriages to narcissists behind her, she's harnessed the transformative power of the emotional freedom technique to guide others on their path to healing and personal growth. Her transformation came when she shifted from why me to for me. And I love that last part because that's what this has been all about. It's really helping others to see why they do things, but yet at the same token, why they do it for themselves. I've had many guests on this show that have shared the perspective that Stephany has shared today, but not quite in the way in which I was really riveted by not only the people that she's had in her life, in which she's had to have freedom from, but she goes into so much depth about a topic that I think is overlooked, which I have to put this disclaimer out there for my listeners that might be struggling with somebody that might be toxic, abusive, or even narcissistic for that matter. No matter what happens, I want you to know that there's always freedom, and you have to exercise that freedom by asking for help. That is the first step. And there's many local domestic abuse clinics and even places where you can go to be safe, even if you have children for that matter, to be able to know that you can escape from that overall persecution that you might be feeling. Because let's face it, Stephany's story, hands down, isn't just about that freedom, isn't about reclaiming what's ahead of you, but also knowing that there is always hope, that there's always an opportunity for you to be the star of your own story if you're willing to take advantage of it, one step at a time. But with that, let's go to the episode. All right, we're here with Stephany Ann. Stephany, thanks for sharing your heart with us today.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'm really excited to be interviewing you for a variety of reasons because as the audience already heard a little bit about your background and what you are all about. And I really want to jump into the age-old question because I actually had this as an aspiration myself growing up, is that you're an attorney. Now, I never made it to be an attorney. I took the LSATs and I was saying to myself, nope, I don't feel like I can do this. So question 1 is, what made you want to be an attorney? And then number 2, maybe you can tell us a little bit about what kind of attorney you are.
What's funny is I actually never wanted to be an attorney either. Going to law school was an advanced degree. My path was the State Department, working for the embassy, becoming an ambassador, and living a life of travel and diplomacy. So that was my route. But when I was in undergrad, I started working at the prosecutor's office. And that's actually where I became a domestic violence advocate. And so kind of in the back of my head, I was like, okay, I could do prosecution work or I could go on to the State Department. In law school, I actually studied international law and trial law. And again, my path was towards the State Department until I found out my first husband, the covert narcissist, was having a bunch of affairs. And he gave me the choice to give up my career and have children and have a family, or he was leaving.
Wow. And it's funny, when you said that you had the opportunity to work for the State Department or actually go down that path.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
I actually worked for the Department of Justice when I did my last internship before graduating with my bachelor's. So it's ironic a little bit with how we both have somewhat of a similar career when it comes to that. You just did it, I just did it, and that's okay. But
yeah,
when you're talking about your first marriage, I mean, I'm assuming, and I'm not married, and my audience knows this already, I haven't been able to find the one in my life, and that's okay because I think we all have that timing in our lives. But I often ask myself, well, when people get married and they go through these relationships, which I've had plenty of clients that have gone through similar circumstances as you, I have seen where they have either had the choice of wanting to work through it or they realize that they need to have a complete new start. So I wonder if you could just tell a little bit about your story of your first marriage and how it got to be where you found out that he was a narcissist and he was hurting you and abusing you.
Yeah. Well, I didn't know he was a narcissist for a really, really, really long time. It's just his behaviors changed. And so we got married right before I went to law school. And when you're single and you have no children, it is so easy to feed into the narcissist's need for excessive supply. So if I can just define a few terms here. So if you remember back from Greek mythology, Narcissus was a man who fell in love with his reflection. And so to be considered a narcissist, you have to meet 5 of the 9 traits. And so one of the first traits is you have this grandiose sense of self-importance, a preoccupation with fantasies of unlimited power, success, wealth, beauty, whatever that is. Narcissists have this belief that one is special and only could be understood by special people. They have this need for excessive admiration and adoration, a sense of entitlement. And, they're very arrogant. They have this very arrogant, haughty behavior. But the thing is that they lack empathy and they will exploit you to get whatever they want. And for someone to be considered a true narcissist, they have to meet at least 5 of these 9 traits. And so it's very difficult in the beginning of a relationship to even know you're with a narcissist and to even be thinking about that. Who's thinking about this? 20 years ago, I wasn't thinking about that. It wasn't even in my radar. My background was in domestic violence. So I spent several years at the prosecutor's office as a domestic violence advocate. And I actually had won the governor's award for my work with victims and survivors of domestic violence. And so now here I am in this marriage. Something is off. It's not normal. It's not typical, but it also doesn't fit the definition of traditional domestic violence the way it was defined 20, 30 years ago. 20, 30 years ago, it was really just focused on physical violence. Or you had so many judges and prosecutors say, well, there's no domestic violence in my county. Okay. But we never really talked about the psychological and emotional abuse. And so for me, when I went off to law school, I was not able to give him all the attention that he wanted, all the admiration, the adoration. Now I had to shift my focus to my studies. And for someone who took the LSAT and thought about going to law school is very challenging. It's time consuming. It became my entire life. And he even told me at one point, he's like, I don't want to hear you talk about the law anymore. I'm not interested. Go find study people.
Wow.
And so it's like he shut me out, and then he looked outside for his source of supply because he still needed all this admiration. He needed someone to worship him. He needed someone to fawn all over him. And so it was during my last year of law school when I found out that he was having all these emotional affairs and maybe physical affairs. I don't know the whole extent. But for me, and I think for many people at the time, we would just label that as cheating. Well, they're just a cheater. I never hear people say it's abuse. And so you have cheating over here on one side and abuse over here. Well, they're just a cheater. They always cheat. He's a cheater. No, that's psychological and emotional abuse. And so it took me many years, and even after our divorce, for me actually to recondition my brain to be like, oh, no, Stephany, that was psychological and emotional abuse. Cheating is abuse. And cheating is what a lot of narcissists do.
I'm curious, what was one of the first signs that you realized that he was actually a narcissist? Was there something that really stood out after a while, especially during that first marriage? And the only reason I ask you this is maybe my listeners are actually in a relationship and they don't really realize that there's these tall tale signs. So I'm wondering if for you, maybe you have some insight as to what you saw in yours, and maybe you have some general warning signs that you can give to somebody that is listening to this that is going through such a relationship.
Yeah. And actually, it will all unfold. I will explain the cycle of narcissistic abuse.
Perfect.
And so the cycle of narcissistic abuse, you have the first cycle is the idealization phase. Then you have the devaluation, love bombing phase, and then you have the discard. In the beginning of a relationship with a narcissist, it is wonderful. It is like the most perfect relationship you could ever ask for. They put you on this pedestal. And who doesn't want that? Who doesn't want all this admiration for themselves? They almost worship you and praise you, and you can do no wrong. They love everything about you. You will hear phrases like, oh, we are soulmates. I manifested you. We are destined to be together. And they mirror you. They mirror your values. You essentially fall in love with yourself, and you don't realize that all of this is going on. So I always tell people, first red flag, if it's too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. And so for me, with both my ex-husbands, they put me on this pedestal and they loved everything about me. They wanted to talk to me all the time. Who doesn't love a guy who opens up and talks all the time? It's like you've found this perfect person. They want to hear your stories. They want you to talk. They want to hear about your adventures. They want to know what your struggles are. And they're the best listeners. And they make you feel so comfortable that you start opening up and you start pouring your heart out to these people. And mind you, this might just be in the first month and you have fallen in love. This is how quickly it happens, because it becomes very intense, very quick. And it's almost like you are under this spell. So that's the idolization phase. Once they have you hooked, and some of these relationships move really quickly. Like my second husband, we met and got married within the same year.
Wow, that's really quick, actually. Yeah.
It's very quick, but some people, it's within a month. It's within 2 months. My second husband, I was older. I had already been married once, and it was like, okay, well, I'm in love with you. I mean, you have just mirrored me. I didn't know that at the time. Mm-hmm. So once they have you hooked, then the mask starts to come off. And then this is where, in the devaluation phase, this is where they start manipulating you. And this is where all the gaslighting comes in. And for listeners who don't know, truly understand what gaslighting is when you manipulate another person into doubting their perceptions, experiences, or understanding of events. It is a form of emotional abuse. It is a highly calculated form of manipulation. And it involves destabilizing you as an individual over time. It is coercive control. And why narcissists use gaslighting is because it helps them avoid any blame or responsibility for their behaviors or actions. They play on your insecurities and they attack your self-esteem. Now remember, in the first stage, you have just told them all your insecurities. Mm-hmm. My second husband knew that my first husband cheated on me for 14 years. He knew I had issues with women, and he would use that. So during the devaluation, when he's gaslighting, he would say stuff, they call it triangulation. He would say stuff like, oh, I just went to the store and this really hot woman was there. All these girls were there and they're having a party and they invited me to come over. I'm kind of thinking about going over to this party. I don't know. Should I go to the party? Should I not? Who does that?
Yeah, right. Who wants to go through and be like,
does that?
Yeah, who wants to come to the party? Anybody? Anybody? Like raising your hands? Yeah, of course I'm going to go because I have this sort of intuition that I should, because you're putting this in my mind. Yeah.
Right. And so he would start to do stuff like that. So they take your insecurities, they take everything that you were vulnerable and you opened up and exposed yourself to them. They take all that and they try to bring you down to their level. Because here's one of the myths. When I was talking to you about the traits, the narcissistic traits, you would think like, wow, this person is so confident. This person is so secure in who they are. This person has a very secure ego and sense of self. No, it's actually the opposite. They are the most fragile people. They have the most fragile ego. They hate themselves. And so during the devaluation phase, they want to bring you down to their level. And so they will start doing the stuff like what my ex-husband was doing, like the triangulations, just all this gaslighting, all this manipulation. Because again, if you look at the overarching piece of narcissistic abuse, it is similar. It is the same with domestic violence. It is power and control. They manipulate and they use gaslighting to control you. They want to control your reactions. If they get a reaction from you, whether it's a negative reaction or a positive reaction, they have controlled you.
This is so much like manipulative communication in a way, because I do public speaking coaching, and I know we didn't really talk about that beforehand, Stephany, but I do a lot of that. And a lot of it is about how do you use the power of the audience to your favor? What do you know about your audience? What do you think they're trying to achieve? I work with a lot of people trying to develop messaging that helps them so much with not only communicating that, but also getting that positive outcome. But change the word positive in what I just said to negative, and now we have narcissism. And I'm just blown away because we have so much power that we utilize, and I don't even think for a second that I don't think I would ever want to do that. And it's weird because I'm a male, and I know that most males have that tendency too because they're in a position of power, most of them. But thank God society, I feel, is changing. And I think that everybody, men, women, whatever you identify as, has that opportunity. I have friends that are homosexual, and I think that they have awesome friendships and have awesome opportunities in relationships to be able to do just as much. So when I hear all this, I'm thinking, how'd you get through this? How does somebody actually get through this to get to the other side, especially after 2 marriages? I'm really curious.
Yeah, well, let's get to the third phase of narcissistic abuse. So we were just talking about devaluation. So they will gaslight you, they will manipulate you, they will do all this stuff, bring you down, make you feel horrible, make you hate yourself, make you feel like everything is your fault. And so then you focus all your time on trying to fix yourself. Well, maybe if I go to therapy, or maybe if I do this or that, and they will make you try to feel like you are the one with a disordered personality. Because what you have here is all of this gaslighting, all of this manipulation, and then you have this intermittent reinforcement of they devalue you, and then they come back and they love bomb you. Now they're complimenting you. Now they've completely switched personalities. And so you'll hear a lot of people say, well, my ex had this Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde personality. They can switch back and forth. And so it becomes very confusing, all this intermittent reinforcement. And what all of this does is create this thing called cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance is just this big, giant fog of confusion. You don't know what is true, what is not true, what is reality, what is not reality. And because of this intermittent reinforcement, this good, the bad, the good, the bad, the good, the bad, it creates a trauma bond. And a trauma bond is very similar to Stockholm Syndrome. If you think about it, you have the kidnapper and you have the victim, where they fall in love with each other. It's not true love. It's not actually love at all. It's a trauma bond. And so a trauma bond forms. And this is why so many people find it very difficult and very challenging to leave these relationships because of the trauma bond. It's very similar to a drug addiction. And I even had said that multiple times in both my marriages. God, I feel like I'm addicted to you, and I don't know why. And so if you think about when people use drugs, the first time they use drugs, they get this really high dopamine rush. And then they use again. But every time they use again, they never get to that first high. But they keep using, thinking that, well, if I use again, or maybe if I use more, maybe I'll get that first high again, that first rush. Similarly, with a trauma bond, with a disordered personality like narcissism, we know that they know how to love us. We know that they know how to treat us well. We know that they know how to be kind to us because that's how they were in the beginning. And so we hold on to that when the times are bad. And we say, no, we can change them. We just got to push through and it will be good again. But similarly to a drug addict, every time you use, you never get that first high. And in a narcissistic relationship, every time you go through the cycle, it gets worse and worse and worse until you have the final discard. Discard is like you discard your trash, right?
Yeah.
So they have either used you up and you are no longer exciting and interesting to them, and they have other supply and they want to go get someone else, they will discard you. Or you find worthiness within yourself and you leave. Those are the only two ways that a relationship with a narcissist ends.
So, just so I have this straight, did both husbands that you had, did they think that they could change you and they thought that they would be able to meet your expectations? Or was it the other way around?
Opposite.
The opposite.
It is the opposite. Yeah. Many of us stay because, one, we start to think that we are the issue because they will say we are the issue. Well, my second husband will say, well, you have all this unhealed trauma from your first husband because of all the cheating. I should be able to go to a hot tub party with a bunch of women and that should be okay. You should be securing yourself with it.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So like they're kind of projecting that and you're like, oh yeah, absolutely. That's fine. You can go do whatever you want.
Yeah. No, we don't want them to go do that.
Yeah, but we don't want them to do that. Yeah. Wow.
But, so then you start thinking, well, if I go to therapy and if I do this and if I change these things, if I change my personality. And so at the end of a relationship with a narcissist, you are the one who is actually changed.
Wow.
Because you have become a different version of yourself. It wasn't who you were in the beginning. And so they don't change. And that's a big takeaway is that you can only work on yourself. You cannot change another person. They have to want to change for themselves. And a lot of narcissists, they are not willing to change. And this is why if you look at their history, you'll see that they've jumped from broken relationship to broken relationship to broken relationship, and why they quickly can cut you off and discard you and move on to the next relationship and have a very serious, intense another relationship is because they feed on that fuel. It fuels them, it supplies them. And if they were to stop and actually look within themselves, it's destructive. You can only live a double life. And in fact, my first husband, he actually committed suicide 2 months ago because it catches up to them eventually. And it's many layers and many layers and many layers of protective self. And I'm not a psychiatrist or psychologist. I'm just speaking from my experience. And I could talk about the legal side of dealing with a narcissist as well, but it eventually catches up to them.
Yeah. I am processing all this because for me, I have had a lot of those situations in my life where I feel like I'm trying to just catch up to whatever's happening. And maybe it's not necessarily narcissism, but I'm trying to emotionally appeal to somebody else and make them feel that, oh, well, you are $1 million in my life. Please accept me for who I am. And I feel in a way you're describing a lot of my first 36 years of my life, which I'm 37 now. I definitely have learned and grown and changed and have definitely helped others learn and grow and change just as much as you have too with what you have been doing. And I think that is so an important lesson that we could easily continue to be in those paths that we are in, kind of like your first husband. And whether we decide to really choose to accept to make those changes that we need to make or we end our lives, I mean, it's a very, very tough, fine line that my heart feels like it's almost wanting to yearn a lot more towards you. But like for this guy, like, come on, there's got to be a way to get to the other side and make you feel like you can change what you always believed as that pattern, that resonance inside of you. I don't know. This is such a fine line to walk on. I feel challenged with what you just said because of the techniques and the ways in which we identify it. So actually, speaking of techniques, you have something called the emotional freedom technique that you have worked on. And I'm wondering if you could share a little bit of that with our listeners.
Yeah, so EFT is one of many wonderful healing modalities out there. And again, when you are coming out of a relationship with a disordered personality, they really say it is like you have just left an occult and you have been brainwashed. And this is why so many people as well will say, oh, well, time heals all wounds, not the wounds from being in a relationship with a narcissist. If I were to do nothing and just sit here and pray and wait it out 5, 10 years from now, I would still be stuck. I would still be in the same place because time does not heal. You actually have to do the hard work of reconditioning, reprogramming, rewiring your brain and your thought patterns. And so EFT, emotional freedom techniques, it's tapping. So it takes some Western practices with some Eastern practices, and you tap on the meridian points of the body, and you do several rounds. The first round is really recognizing what is coming up, what big heavy emotion is coming up, where you're feeling it in the body, because our body holds on to trauma. And after being in relationships with has been a lot of trauma on you. And so you need to feel where you're feeling that trauma and then sit with it, acknowledge it, and then release it. And so the first round is really acknowledging it and where you feel it. Second round is releasing. And then I actually do a third round where we tap into the person we are becoming. And it's just one of many powerful modalities out there. And actually, I found it in 2020. 2020 was such a confusing year. And imagine that to the nth degree when you are in a toxic relationship and the world has shut down. Because for me, my second husband, we got married in December 2019, and then the world shut down. And I hadn't even been with him for a year. We're still getting to know each other. And his mask came off when the world shut down. And so it was very confusing to know what is 2020 behavior, what is just the craziness of 2020, and what was actually his behavior. And so this, again, was why it was just very confusing. But in 2020, I learned about EFT. We had separated for several months, and I just needed something. And I thought I was signing up to work with a practitioner, but I actually signed up to become a practitioner. And I love that because the divine knows what we need when we need it. And instead of me doing 5 sessions with a practitioner, I did hundreds of hours to become a certified practitioner, but it just became my life. I just spent so many hours and days and weeks and months and now years working on healing myself and reprogramming and rewiring my brain. And so it's just a powerful modality to rapidly heal from this type of trauma.
It is. And it takes great strength and great courage to be able to move towards that, because it can be oftentimes difficult, especially if you're stuck in the emotions of that, to be able to say, yes, there's a path moving forward. And I've coached a lot of people, even through my business, being able to do that, because it isn't just necessarily, oh, here's a blueprint, good luck. It is, wow, there's a lot of emotion with this. Let's process some of these emotions today so that you can pave a way. And I'm not saying either that I'm a therapist, and thank you for saying that too. You're an attorney, though, which is actually interesting in itself, being able to discuss those legality aspects of it. But I think you are representing what many people have gone through, especially since the pandemic. And I've had plenty of people find their calling here on the show, and it's always interesting. It gives me a warm, tingling sensation every time to just hear about those unique, captivating stories. And yours is definitely up there when it comes to, I need to find my strength. And I love that so much. Stephany, we're getting close to the end of our time, but I wanted to talk about the fact that you're an author and you have written some works that are part of some larger works. And I'm wondering if you could share a little bit of that for us.
Yeah, so I was asked to contribute a chapter on a book on leadership qualities of a leader. And I looked at it through the lens of being in domestic violence and working with women who have gone through abuse with a narcissist. And I kind of just talk about what I do and the encouragement, the resilience. And we have these leaders, these great leaders, but a lot of these great leaders have been through hardships, have been through traumas. And what makes them so great is that they've overcome all of that. We have the resilience, we have the tenacity, we have the strength. And in the end, we have what's called like post-secondary, I can't even think of the word, post-secondary traumatic something, but it's where we can take what we've been through and we can empower others with it. And so for me, it's sharing my story. And I don't like to believe that we go through all this trauma to keep it inside. And one of the things too that I've learned over the years, and even 20 years ago when I was working in domestic violence was that shame wants to keep us small. Shame wants us to not share our stories. And even the narcissist would say, no one is going to hear your story. No one is going to believe you. You are not going to amount to anything. You are worthless. No one is ever going to love you. You might as well just stay with me and just take my abuse. And so what we have to do, we have to have more people coming out and sharing their stories and talking about this, because then there's light, and shame can't handle the light or the truth or vulnerability or authenticity. And that's why I share my story, and I encourage other people to share their story too. And as I've begun to share my story, I get so many emails all the time from people like, you just described my relationship. You just described my father when I was growing up. You just described my mother when I was growing up. You've described my girlfriend. Or people are like, wow, I haven't thought about this relationship, but 20 years ago when I was in college, he was a narcissist. Mm-hmm. Let's start talking about it.
It's always important to be able to share it, right? And I think that we have forums like the podcast, or we have television, we have documentaries, whatever medium it is. And we often hear the one side of it. We hear the both sides of it. We might hear 3 or 4 different perspectives. Depends on who you have and what kind of format. But I think hearing it from somebody that has actually gone through it is just a power in itself. And I think that we often undervalue it because we hear so many times those stories and we're like, I still don't want to listen to that pattern. And I hear some of those things from other people of, well, I know what they're trying to say and I know that it's really important, but I still don't want to listen to it. But it isn't until you actually go through it that sometimes people then finally start to understand and listen. But yet, like you said, there's a lot of shame. And the shame should not be the part that holds us back so much. And actually, that leads into my final question for you to wrap up, because I noticed this in your bio that I read to everybody. It says that your transformation came when you shifted from the why me to the for me. Most times I ask people, what is your why? What is your for me, Stephany, that you want to share with everyone today as we wrap up?
Yeah, well, my for me is that the why me is when we are stuck in this victim mentality, this victim state of mind, this victim mindset, where all this bad stuff is constantly happening to us. And when you're in the victim mindset, you can't see the lessons. And if you can't see the lessons, you don't know what to heal and what to release. And if you don't learn the lessons, you repeat the patterns. When you shift to for me, now you become the star of your story, not the victim, not the person on the sidelines of your story. When you shift to for me, you become the star of your story. Then you can see the people in your life. For me, for so long, when I was stuck in the victim mindset, I saw my 2 ex-husbands as monsters trying to destroy my life. When I was able to change my perspective and see them not as monsters, but as teachers who were here to propel me into my empowerment, but also to teach me lessons. And from those lessons, I gained tear-filled, hard, valuable nuggets of wisdom. And when you can make that shift in your mindset, you can see where you need more compassion. You can actually forgive. And remember, forgiveness is for us. It is not for them. You can forgive, you can release, you can let go, and you become empowered. So that is the for me.
It's so important to feel like you can be empowered. And I think that we as a society sometimes lose that perspective because we have other people telling us what we need to do, what do we need to do in a particular day, what we need to do with our money, what we need to do with our lives, what we need to do. The list goes on that what to do's. But when you say it that way, when you say it that it's for us to be able to have that control, we could be the stars of our own show. I think that is so true in many aspects, not just the way in which we can empower ourselves, but also empower others. And I love that so much. I thought for a moment during this interview that you were going to tell me you're going to sue me because of being an attorney. Thank goodness you're not. Instead, what I find is that you gave me so many new perspectives on the term narcissism. And for all those reasons, and I think for all the things that you do to continue to carry this conversation forward, which, by the way, congratulations on the Governor's Award of Excellence for doing such work.
Hey, thank you.
I want to thank you, Stephany, for being part of Speaking from the Heart today. It was really a privilege not only to hear a good part of your story, but also to hear a good part of you, because I think the good part is what we need to hear. And I'm glad that you're not carrying that shame. I'm glad that you're empowering others to do that. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Stephany's story is a reminder that there's not only people in this world that are narcissistic, not only are there people that are abusers, but there are also people that are willing to take advantage of others, regardless of what might be going on in someone's life, in order to exploit them for their finances, for their social status, for whatever cultural demands they might be able to achieve. There are always going to be people that are putting you down, striking you out, crossing them off their list, but at the same time, you have to realize that there is always going to be justice at the end of the day. Whether it's going to happen today, tomorrow, even a few months from now, a few years from now, maybe not even happening at all. But the real fact of the matter is that advocacy is what will bring this awareness of this topic not only to the forefront, but it will also allow us to keep moving forward, to be able to be diplomatic, to be able to prosecute those individuals that should be prosecuted for their crimes. But I have to say, somebody that has been through so many different things in their life, but yet has become a champion of willing to be able to survive, to be able to help others, really defines the purpose of why we need to speak from the heart, to be able to communicate what is really on our minds, our hearts for that matter, the very essence of why we even started this podcast in the first place. But we have to realize that we can't feed into this narcissism either. And I love that today's story from Stephany really exemplifies different areas of life where we can not only take control of that, but we have to be able to learn the traits that define us, that allow us to dedicate the time needed to address these all-important situations. Which begs the question, what time are you giving yourself to be able to learn and grow in the ways in which you should be avoiding these types of topics? I know that's easier said than done. We feel that there's a sense of comfort, even if we're being abused, which is a very sensitive subject in itself, and I realize that might be something of a triggering point for many of us. But we have to learn that if we don't say anything, if we keep on enabling it, we're just as guilty as the people that are continuing to push and prosecute against these individuals. We have to learn to be able to say something and say it with conviction, which is why it's so hard for us to really learn to understand why these people do the things that they do. What is the definition of perfect? Can we do no wrong? Are we destined to always have to be together? Should we maintain a relationship even though you are abusing me? This gaslighting phenomenon, which I love that Stephany talked about today, is really the emotional abuse. It's destabilizing any type of responsibility that anybody has and really points the finger at the other person. It's not my fault. It's your fault for this happening in the first place. And those types of conversations are not only very triggering, but they also corner somebody, thinking that they have no ability to be able to speak up. Which is why my voice in this ever-changing world, something that I even work on with my clients at Your Speaking Voice LLC, is truly important for them to feel empowered, but to do it in a safe way. Now, I don't claim to be any type of domestic violence individual, or do I claim that I want to help people that are going through some of the most toughest moments in their lives. I think that's where social workers, therapists, even psychiatrists for that matter, are trained specifically to be able to coach these individuals through some of the most painful moments that might ever experience in their lives. In my practice of coaching, I'm talking about being able to find the words deep inside of yourself to be able to speak them into existence, which sometimes can be very fragile in themselves. Being able to learn and understand the importance of not only keeping that momentum going, to be able to keep growing, even though you have all these different things that are happening in your life, even those that are narcissists in nature. You have to understand that gaslighting is not a joke. It happens, and it happens way too often, even in the social media atmosphere that we live in. And then you have to look at the other side of this, the trauma bond that we often create, which trauma in itself is something that we've talked about in a few episodes now, about the importance of recognizing it, being able to push through it, to work through what you might have as an association with that connection. Because love bombing, especially when you think that you really love somebody and you're blowing them out of the water, you might not be doing it in the right way. You might be doing it in a bad way. Love bombing in itself is a very negative term. We have to understand that if we create these relationships that are very toxic in nature and we're throwing people under the bus, how are we ever going to have discourse or even cognitive dissonance to be able to separate ourselves from the relationships that we should not be in? We can't keep feeling this feeling forever. It's almost like having that rush of drugs coming through us. This is why you have to heal from the wounds that might be transpiring. You have to find a way to find that courage inside of you to be able to keep working on yourself. And that, I know, can be the toughest thing that you will ever do in your entire life. But trust me on this. From somebody that has gone through so much trauma myself in a variety of different ways, and have had so many people share their awesome stories about how they've worked through that, there is hope. There is always hope. Stephany talked about being as an author, about the different areas that are involved with having these hard times, working through and getting that strength, despite having two individuals in her life that have caused all these different pains and emotions, to keep finding the strength to keep moving forward. Shame, oftentimes, is the bigger precursor to why we never decide to move forward. Shame. You know, I've heard shame so many different times in so many different ways, but even in this episode today, I am reflecting on the fact that shame can have so many different types of consequences. Well, as this episode comes out, this happens a few weeks after we've had so many different guests and even so many different experiences in my own life, personally, that have occurred through shame. Shame in itself ridicules us, makes us feel less of a person, pushes us down. Shame really makes us feel like we're worthless, and it pushes us down into something that we never thought we could be. The most negative version of ourselves that we could ever experience. But yet, for some people, shame is all that they have to hold on in order to survive. And the weird thing about shame is that it comes in so many different forms. The financial, not having enough money, so you feel shame knowing that you can't afford certain things for your kids, your significant other, or maybe even others in your family that are trying to celebrate. Let's look at the social side. Maybe you're not as inquisitive, loquacious, even talented like some of your counterparts, but yet you're held to a higher standard. You're being disenfranchised. You feel as if you're being pulled down into something that you can never escape. But yet, shame has another weird component to it. It's the patterns that we keep repeating, reinforcing the fact that shame is here to stay. In other words, as we continue to have the bad experiences, the negative thoughts that surround us, we start to live in a life in which we will never have any escape, and that the only people that we think love us and care about us are the very narcissists that actually don't. They actually want to hear themselves feel valued, but they are going about it not only in the wrong way, but they're also treating others like disgusting pieces of trash. I can't tell you how many times in my life I've had to escape shame whether that is by my own personal vendetta or going against somebody that I knew was creating such a bad impression about me. Even if I was telling myself that story, maybe not even based on facts, I was learning every step along the way of how important it is to keep learning and growing and respecting the patterns that are surrounding me. As a matter of fact, that respect I thought I had to earn with every single relationship that I ever entered. But Stephany said something that will forever change me because of our experience here on this show. And that is to be the star of your own story. You are the only one that has that power to be able to do that. You can receive so much help, so much guidance, so many opportunities to be an advocate, to be able to feed into all kinds of different aspects of your life, both positive and negative. You can continue to wrestle with the question of being perfect, figuring out whether you are destined to be with that person that abuses you, that gaslights you, that throws love bombs, that creates that trauma bond, that maybe makes you have that rush, almost as if you're taking drugs. But I want you to know that all those things are just sensations. You're feeling those five senses. If you really are serious about taking control of your life, not only should you seek help, whether that is professional or through a coach, but I'm telling you, your value is worth so much more than you might even imagine, even as you listen to these words today. But you have to learn that you are the star of your story, and that the patterns that you have been repeating do not need to be repeated again. Because let's face it, you have the strength to move forward. You have the courage to keep pressing forward. And oh yes, you have the opportunity of all opportunities to change the course, whether you think shame is in control or not, to keep moving forward. I want to end this episode by saying it's really important that you get the help that you deserve. I appreciate the time Stephany gave today to share this perspective of what she's been through. But if you really do need help with all kinds of domestic violence situations that you're experiencing, or maybe you need help to get out of a very bad situation, please, no matter where you are in the world, reach out to your local authorities. Reach out to the people that really care about you and tell them what's really going on. But also, know this. You're the only one that can control the responsibility that you have to change what is happening around you. And just know that there are people that truly care and would never want to see you gone from this earth. You are the most important thing that might matter to them, and you didn't even realize it. Make the call, save your life, and be somebody that you never thought you could ever be. Be the better person on the other side, because people like you can then be on my show to tell your story and spread that awareness, just as we have heard today. Thanks for listening to episode number 116 of Speaking from the Heart, and I look forward to hearing from your heart very soon.
Thanks for listening. For more information about our podcast and future shows, search for Speaking from the Heart to subscribe and be notified wherever you listen to your podcasts. Visit us at www.yourspeakingvoice.biz for more information about potential services that can help you create the best version of yourself. See you next time.